So here we are with the third comic that I created all the way back in May 2019. So this is the front cover here for The Search for Superman. It's not a very long comic, very short comic, 6 pages long. So if we have a look at this front cover, it's okay, right? We've got the title here, The Search for Superman, which is a contrast of colors. So it's clearly labeled here. You can clearly read that compared to the background. We've got the My Dot Comics kind of like logo change here at the bottom right. And then we've got Supergirl here as well. So it looks like she's flying as well. One thing that could have definitely made this better in terms of this image here is having the hair flowing. So the hair should be, because she's moving in this motion, right? The hair should be moving in that motion here, the opposite motion. So the hair should be back, right, like this. Should be back, flowing over here like that, to move the other way, to give the impression that she's flying. However, we do have the background here. So the background here with the motion kind of like line, the motion blurs here rather, gives the impression that Supergirl is flying here in this very poorly made front cover for this particular comic. So before we go through the rest of this review here, I do want to point out that the background that was used in all of these panels is actually an HDRI with depth of field. So I've used depth of field to kind of like blur out the background to make it look like we're fighting, right? We're in the sky basically, but having like tall buildings. So that's why it looks like this and inside this comic here. So this is me like experimenting. I didn't have any buildings or anything, didn't have an idea of how to create buildings or put buildings in. Where all the way back in May 2019 my knowledge was limited, but I knew about HDRIs and I thought like, hey, for background for this particular comic, because I need these characters to be in the sky, I can just get a HDRI and have them higher up in the HDRI that has buildings. It'll make it look like they're flying. So that was my thinking behind the background use of the HDRI in this comic. So the first panel here, page 2, panel 1, looks okay. We've got General Zod here, a version of General Zod here, and he's got typical kind of like General Zod dialogue. How many people must I kill before you face me, Kal-El? Because we all know General Zod, he likes to use Kryptonian names, right? He doesn't like to use the Earth names. So he will always use Kal-El. We know that. I know that from experience, from reading Superman comics and reading, watching Superman movies, the original movies. So with General Zod here, I based him on General Zod from Superman 2. So that's kind of what I was thinking when I was doing the dialogue. I was like, okay, I know General Zod for Superman 2, the way he sounds. How can I use that same language he would use in the dialogue? So that's what we got here. In terms of the artwork here, you can see there's a problem here with the artwork. This here, I think this is supposed to be an S here as well or something, or a Z or something that didn't come out properly. And I believe the artwork here as well, there's some issues here with the artwork as well, which I didn't pay attention to at the time. So that's the issues with page 2, panel 1 there. Now in panel 2 of the same page, we move the camera around the back and we can see a figure here in the far away here. Looks, you know, with the typical Superman colors, Supergirl colors that they would wear the costume over here. And we have the dialogue here. Now the problem with this panel is that the dialogue's in the wrong order again. So this is supposed to be said first and then this is supposed to be said second, but because we read from left to right, you're going to read this first and then you're going to read this first, and it doesn't make sense when you read it like that. So that's another mistake I made there with the dialogue. Had to do better there. So that's something I definitely needed to improve on. Like I keep getting the dialogue wrong. I don't understand comics. Why am I getting it wrong there? Because I don't understand about comics at that moment in time. In May 2019, I don't have any knowledge of comics, right? I'm just creating a comic the way I think it should be created, the way my very primitive knowledge of comics is in terms of how to read and how things are with a comic. So one thing that is definitely wrong with this dialogue here, I mean the dialogue's okay. It seems as though Kal-El does not wish to face me and instead sends his cousin to fight his battles for him. He wouldn't use the word cousin, right? We know about Kal-El, he definitely would not use that word there. He would definitely use like Kara or Zor-El or something, a Kryptonian name. He would use a Kryptonian name or maybe even a Kryptonian slur or something, right? Whatever, but he definitely would not use that kind of language. So that's something that I would definitely change if I was creating this character again, because I know he would not, General Zod would never use human or Earth kind of like words. He'd use Kryptonian words because that's where he's born, right? That's where he's from. So he's not going to use like cousin. I don't think they would use that kind of language in Krypton, on Krypton rather. Moving on to page 3, panel 1, we have a close-up of Supergirl here, looking pretty good here. Looks like Supergirl to me anyway, with the blonde hair and everything. So it looks pretty bang on in terms of what Supergirl should look like. The dialogue is okay for Supergirl, right? Earth is under my protection. General Zod, leave now. Now, looking at this, I would probably have the leave now section in a separate word balloon. So have this first section, Earth is under my protection, General Zod, and then have another word balloon come out here and have leave now in that word balloon. I think that makes more sense. Also, we need a better expression here. There's not much expression in terms of the eyes. If you look at the eyes, they look kind of like dead as well, the eyes. So it doesn't look, what is she looking at? It doesn't look like she's looking at him. There's no intensity there or something, because General Zod is someone to be feared, right? So she doesn't look intimidated or scared. She should be, because he's gonna be a way better fighter than she is, right? In terms of, they may have like similar strength, but in terms of the Kryptonian kind of like the yellow sun and everything, doing all that magic for them. But General Zod would be the better fighter because he's going to have more experience. So she's going to struggle against her. So she should be kind of like worried. She's showing a bit of, and so showing a bit of like worry, right? Knowing like, okay, I'm in over my head here. How am I going to fight General Zod, or how am I going to like get rid of him so he doesn't cause any issues here in this situation? So that's something I would definitely look at. So that expression here definitely needs to be worked on here. Moving on to panel 2 of page 3 here. And we've got a close-up here of General Zod. We have some decent dialogue here. Mind your tongue, Kara. That is no way to speak to your general. And then he says, where is Kal-El? That's absolutely fine. That dialogue, I think it's okay. I do like the expression here. It's a bit mischievous here. What I would consider General Zod to be, he's like arrogant, cocky. He's like, I'm a general, right? What are you going to do about it? You can't touch me, I'm better than you, and all this kind of stuff. So that is the way his character is. So that's why he's got this like smirk on his face. So I think that fits his character perfectly here in this panel here. So that's pretty decent in terms of what's being done in this panel. So finally, in page 4, panel 1, we get to see where General Zod is and where Supergirl is in relation to each other. Remember, this is very important for the reader to understand where they are in terms of their positioning in a particular scene. Like, how far are these characters away from each other in terms of space, and where are they in space? So it's very, very important so you don't confuse the reader. This is very, very important when you're creating your comics or doing any sort of visual graphic novel storytelling. The reader needs to know where characters are in relation to each other, to a background, to a scene, to a particular room they're in or building or whatever. They need to know so they can figure out in their minds what's happening as well. So it helps them, it gives them a piece of the puzzle that they can put in their minds when they're reading the story to understand where these characters are. So that's very, very important. So I have managed to do this in this story, so that's a bit of improvement there in this particular panel anyway. So this is a dialogue. You could have been a great general, but you disobeyed orders from the Kryptonian Council and took innocent lives. I mean, that's okay from Kara, right? From Supergirl, Kara, whatever you want to call her. She would know about this, what happened, because she came after Superman, so she would know about what General Zod did more than Superman would do, because Superman was shot off as a kid, as a baby to Earth. And then when we look at General Zod's dialogue here, I only did what the Kryptonian, right? Kryptonian, what's Kryptonian? So you can see that I didn't catch this spelling. Why didn't I catch this spelling of Kryptonian? Because I didn't read it out aloud. So this is very important why you read the dialogue out aloud, especially when you're creating dialogue for your characters. Read it out. Read it out as that character. Like, become that character, speak in that voice and that tone, and then you will know whether that character sounds like that, or that is what they would use, the language they would use, the speech patterns and everything. So I only did what the Kryptonian, I definitely would have caught this if I read the dialogue out loud, which is what I do all the time now. So whenever I create dialogue for all of my stories, even the pages that I'm going through, I'm like, does this character sound like this when I speak it out loud? And when they don't, I know I'm missing the mark, and I'll go back and change it, because then I will know whether the character is true to themselves, instead of me just writing dialogue that is actually for another character and not for this particular character. So it's very, very important to do that. So other than that, the dialogue is fine, right? I only did what the Kryptonian Council wasn't able to do. That sounds like Zod in terms of like, yo, I'm gonna do what I think is necessary, whether the council wanted me to or not. So that's definitely something General Zod would say. Panel 2 of page 4 here, we've got the reverse camera angle shot, which is good. We can now kind of like see behind the head of General Zod here, and then we can see Supergirl here, so we can see where they are again in relation to each other. The dialogue here is fine. So where is Kal-El quivering away in his fortress of solitude? So probably again I would have another word balloon come out here and then have this particular portion of the dialogue where it says quivering away in his fortress of solitude, probably in this dialogue here, to make that slightly better in terms of when he's speaking and splitting up the speech here. Now what you'll notice as well is the background here as we go. Let me go back to the previous pages. This background's here 1, 2, 3 and 4 here. Sorry, 1, 2, 3 and 4. You can see that they're in the sky, right? They're floating in the sky. That makes sense. They're high up. The buildings, these are like tall buildings. You can see the skyline here, the horizon line and everything. However, when we get to like this panel here, this one, even here and even here, these panels here, look at where we are now. We're lower down. So that's a mistake, right? They were still up high in the sky, and the HDRI that I used didn't compensate for that, right? I didn't compensate for that when I was turning the camera. I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't thinking about that. Also, that's very important when you have a HDRI, if you're going to use it, is to think about, okay, if I turn my camera around to do these shots here from behind or whatever, it's going to move the HDRI, and it's not going to make sense, especially if they're flying, that they're lower down now. So they're literally like, they're not very far from the ground. They're probably like, what, 10 feet maybe from the ground, instead of being whatever they were, 200, 300, 1,000 feet in the air or whatever they were. So that's a mistake there using HDRI. So one, I would definitely look into, if I was going to use HDRI, to make sure that these characters are still in the air in the same place. They haven't floated down. I think they were supposed to be here in the air here, like this height. So that is a mistake with the HDRI. So page 5, panel 1 here, we have a close-up of Supergirl here. To get that kind of like expression, right, to get the look at the expression of the character, what they're saying now, because we're getting towards like the end of this kind of like sequence here. We definitely need to improve the expression here. It's not very good at all. We need, I mean, that looks pretty good with the expression here with the brows, that's fine, but the mouth needs to be open up high, a bit more like she's shouting, right? And the dialogue here is in the wrong order as well. So again, this should be spoken first, and then this should be spoken second. But because we're reading comics left to right, you're going to read this first, and then you're going to read this first, which means this is in the wrong order. The reason why she needs to be shouting or showing a bit more emotion is because she's got the exclamation mark here at the end of the dialogue, which means she's emphasizing it. So in order to create that emphasize that dialogue, we need to show more emotion, show more like she's shouting or doing something with her mouth here, in terms of like opening her mouth and kind of like being more aggressive, right? Because that would make sense with the tone of the dialogue, and that gives more gravitas to the dialogue here. So moving finally to page 5, panel 2, we have General Zod here with a very stern expression here. His head is tilted down. You can see he's more serious now. He's got a very serious look on his face. And he's got his dialogue here. If Kal-El won't face me, then you will have to do. That dialogue's fine. Nothing wrong with it particularly. There's nothing wrong with this dialogue. But that stern face tells you everything, right? The expression adds to this tone of this dialogue just by this stern look, that he just had enough now of this talk. He wants to just like have a fight, basically. This scene is finished, so to speak, where it's like, okay, we've built up all this tension, and now it's going to we're going to release that tension by having an action sequence. And then we move to page 6, which is to be continued, because I didn't know how to create a fight sequence or action sequence, especially with General Zod and Supergirl flying around. No idea how to do that. Didn't want to practice it. This was just basically like practicing the tension, right? How to build up a scene, create tension, and then obviously you would release that tension in good storytelling. So that's what all good stories do, is they build up the tension and then they release that tension. It could be some sort of action sequence, could be whatever, right? But they build up the tension and then they release it. That's how you tell good stories. Before we move on to the next comic to review, I want to go back here to this particular panels here, panel 1 and 2 here from page 4, is it? Page 4 here. Which is, I've just noticed that there's something wrong with the positioning here. So if we look at the positioning here with this panel, we have General Zod here on the right and then Supergirl here on the left. When we turn the camera around, Supergirl should not be on this side. Supergirl should be on this side here. So that's a mistake, right? How can she have moved from this to this side here? That doesn't make sense, because if we're just moving the camera around, Supergirl should be on the right hand side here, and he could have General Zod could have the dialogue go here, or he could have the dialogue go up there. It doesn't matter, right? So the dialogue could be here, or the dialogue could be here. It doesn't matter. The point is that Supergirl should be over here. So that's a mistake looking back at this actually in terms of positioning. So I probably confused the reader, like how is Supergirl moved from there to here? That doesn't make sense, because obviously Zod is on the left hand side. So Zod is here. That means Supergirl should be over here if you look at the reverse camera angle of this. So that's a mistake. So that's something I'm picking up right now. I didn't see that in my notes. There you go. There's always issues picking up. I'm still picking them up now, even as we're going through this particular review.